730 days into 15 days to slow the spread. Well, in the UK, 9 out of 10 people who are dying of COVID-19 right now are vaccinated. 90% of people dying from COVID-19 are vaccinated in the UK. We have Senator Mitt Romney here in the United States who has voted in favor of continuing to make preschool-aged children, little tots, mask. In the Head Start program, masking is mandatory. Romney voted in favor of that. Romney voted against rescinding the mask mandate on airplanes, on public transportation, as dictated by the federal government. And this kind of tyranny is anti-science. It's ridiculous. I traveled a lot this past week. You guys know I was in Florida. And it's hilarious, actually, because everyone cheats on their masks, even accepting the premise that masks are effective, which I don't accept, but even accepting the premise that they are, the way that people wear their masks on airplanes and in airports is a joke. Like, everybody has them pulled below their nose. Everyone constantly puts them under their chin to like take a long break to eat a snack. Everyone's got little holes and gaps on the side of their mask, including me. I do this because otherwise you can't breathe. It's terrible under there, and they're ineffective, and it's stupid, and my daughter hates it, but everyone does this. So even if we accepted the incorrect premise or the false premise that masks work, the way that people wear masks in airports and in schools and everywhere would be a very ineffective way of wearing them. And yet, these tyrants, these anti-science, pro-tyranny politicians and bureaucrats are still trying to enact their control over us. The American people have had enough. And in comes, of course, Ukraine and Russia. In comes this warmongering that's happening in Ukraine to distract us. Well, to distract us from what? To distract us from the fact that most of us have had COVID. A lot of us have had COVID twice. Most of us understand that we're going to get COVID at some point. People who think the vaccine is effective are welcome to get the vaccine. They're welcome to get boosted. LOL. I don't know what kind of data they're looking at that would cause them to make that decision, but to each his own. But what are they trying to distract us from? Because all of their policy, their interventions have been a complete failure. Well, they're trying to distract us from the fact that right now the United States is engaged in negotiations for what's called a pandemic pact. A pandemic pact. Now, what is a pandemic pact? This is something that was not sponsored, but spearheaded by the World Health Organization. And an article in Nature magazine, actually from December, several months ago, talks in more detail about, this is so terrifying. This is otherworldly. It's hard to believe this is true. This is what they write. Again, this is in December. They say, the latest SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus variant of concern, they're talking about Omicron, world leaders met to negotiate a way of ensuring that a crisis on the scale of the COVID-19 pandemic won't happen again. Initially on the table was a legally binding pandemic treaty that would dictate how nations should respond to future outbreaks. Think about that. A legally binding treaty that would dictate how nations respond to future outbreaks. That means that countries like Sweden, who didn't impose vaccine mandates and didn't impose lockdowns, wouldn't be allowed to do that. That means different states here in the United States, like Florida, wouldn't be allowed to be free states, wouldn't be allowed to follow the science. Our government officials would be bound by a legally binding treaty above the level of our government. This is an extra governmental treaty that we, the people, would be forced to adhere to. Like, who even gives our lawmakers the right to give away our sovereignty? George W. Bush actually got smacked down by the Supreme Court for giving away our sovereignty to the United Nations. I don't see how this is any different. You can't give away our sovereignty. You just can't. You don't have the power and the authority to do that. That's what is happening behind our back right now. This is what the director of the World Health Organization said, Dr. Tedros. He said, Omicron demonstrates just why the world needs a new accord on pandemics. A new accord on pandemics. He says the quote unquote me first approaches from countries that stymie the global solidarity needed to deal with a global threat. I mean, this is so terrifying. This is like Great Reset level stuff, where who exactly is going to be in charge of dictating what the proper way to handle a pandemic is? What country in the world, even taking us away from the fact for a second that each country has sovereignty and should be able to make their own decisions, who has a monopoly on handling COVID-19 absolutely correctly? No country handled it perfectly, which means there's going to be these unelected international bureaucrats making these decisions, like the World Health Organization, the UN. Are you joking? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.